Hello and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. Today we're going to talk about what 2024 was like from a Tolkien and Middle-earth perspective. Welcome back, my name is Ben, I'm the Librarian. Today we're taking a look back at 2024 and all of the things that happened in the Tolkien Middle-earth universe during this time. Okay, we won't take a look at absolutely everything that happened in 2024 because there was a lot. And that's kind of the big thing from 2024 is that 2024 was a huge year for Tolkien and Middle-earth. There was so much that happened. It's probably the biggest year in a long time in terms of content that was released and things going on. It was an exciting time. It was certainly an exciting time for me to start this YouTube channel, which I started just kind of at the beginning of 2024 with so much going on. There's been a lot to cover. Honestly, there's been more to cover than I could possibly cover on this channel with the limited time that I have to devote to it. And so I just want to take a look back and kind of see what's really happened this year, what's been impactful. And I won't be able to talk about everything, but let's talk about the big things that happened. Number one, I think on this has to be Rings of Power Season 2. Rings of Power Season 2, whether you liked it or hated it, was a big moment. It really did bring Lord of the Rings back into the cultural zeitgeist of 2024 and had a lot of people talking about it, either positively or negatively. And now that we know that it's been renewed for a third season, we can expect it to continue to impact for years to come. Of course, we know there's supposed to be 5 seasons overall, running over about 10 years. But now we have official confirmation that it has been renewed for a third season, and so that will be going into production over the next year. Then, of course, we also had a new Middle-earth film release. So in addition to a TV show that spanned over 10 hours of content, we also have this new movie, The War of the Rohirrim, which I've done a couple of videos on recently. And so, of course, we spent a lot of the year in kind of speculation and build-up. Once we knew that it had been delayed to December, it's all kind of build up until that point, and then got released to mixed reviews for sure. If you look on Rotten Tomatoes, that critics, they didn't really like it, but the fans, they really did quite like it a lot. And so War of the Rohirrim is a big moment for kind of the Middle-earth universe right now because it is a completely different medium than we've seen before being ported into anime while still maintaining a lot of the visual elements and world building that went on in the Peter Jackson films. And it's already had its digital release, and so if you're interested in seeing it and aren't able to make it to the theaters, then you can actually watch it right now. Though I do recommend seeing it in theaters if it's at all possible for you to do it because it's a much better experience to be able to view it on the big screen. So those were obviously the biggest things, and I'd say on a normal year, we would be happy with just like one of those, but there was even more stuff that happened in 2024. The other really big piece was news. We got news about the Hunt for Gollum film coming out. I mean, it's obvious that they want to be able to capitalize on this property. All of the people who have obtained rights to Lord of the Rings properties, to Middle-earth properties, they want to be able to capitalize it. It is such a big and enduring fandom that it would be silly not to. And so it's not really a surprise that they want to make more films, but it was very interesting to kind of hear where they were going with this. So we got the Hunt for Gollum film announced, and of course that's a tentative title. It may remain the title, it may not, but what we know is that it will be Gollum-centric, and Andy Serkis will be both reprising his role in it and directing it. And so I've done a video about what the source material for that movie possibly could be, but there's still a lot of unknowns there. It's supposed to come out in 2026, which interestingly should line up with probably the next release of Rings of Power. So we could have another big year in 2026 with this. Over the next couple of years, we will be tracking that a lot. There's certainly other news just besides film and TV though that we got this year. Different things that were happening, including the release of some new works of J.R.R. Tolkien. So we got the collected poems of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I have not obtained these myself and I haven't read them, but from what I hear, people are really loving them. And this is the first time in a while that there's been new unpublished works of J.R.R. Tolkien that have been released. It's of course getting harder and harder to do that because there are less and less unpublished works. Almost everything that he has written has at this point received publication in some form or another. So to get these poems just was a big deal in kind of the Tolkien community and the scholarship community to be able to have access to these in a much more accessible way than ever before. So that was a big deal in the world of books, which is of course where all of this stuff really started. This brings us to the Lord of the Rings musical that came to Chicago. So it had been over in England and it came over to Chicago. So this was the first time that it had been performed in the United States, and reviews were mixed about it, which seems to be the case for anything Lord of the Rings that comes out, but certainly interesting that we got another adaptation of this work in another medium. Speaking of different mediums, we got another Lego set this year, and I did not get this one. I have the Rivendell one back here. I do not have the Barad-dûr set, but the Barad-dûr set was cool, and if nothing else, it was really important that it signaled Lego's commitment to continuing with the franchise, because we had kind of had a dearth of Lord of the Rings Lego stuff coming out, and then we got Rivendell, which could have just been kind of a one-off homage, but then they did Barad-dûr, and so it seems like they're committed, and we pretty well know that there's some kind of Shire set that's going to be coming out in 2025. So that is very exciting to see that Lego remains committed. Hopefully we will see more, and hopefully some cheaper sets that come out down the road. All right, we also saw some news on the gaming front. We were anxiously anticipating the Tales of the Shire getting released in 2024, and that did not happen. It got delayed until March 25th of 2025, but we did get that news, and we did get to see the first gameplay of this, which looks very much like what we thought it was going to be. This Hobbit-centric life sim game where you get to live in the Shire and do things very similar to things you might do in like Animal Crossing. So again, that's not everything, but all in all, I'd say it was just a giant year for Tolkien and Middle-earth. There weren't a lot of things that were really bad. We didn't have anything on the scale of the Gollum video game, for example, this year. So that signals to me that we are moving in a good and a positive direction in terms of Tolkien fandom. I think as a whole, we are getting some good quality stuff, even if it's not always exactly the way we would do it or I would do it. We're seeing a lot of interest in the property and in continuing with it. And it's important as we see Amazon adapting Tolkien into the Rings of Power, as we see New Line Cinema adapting things like The War of the Rohirrim and coming in with Hunt for Gollum. This is important, and the reason it's really important is because Christopher Tolkien has been dead for a few years now. With Christopher's passing, it became possible for the first time for some of Tolkien's other works to potentially get licensed out for things like films and other adaptations, because that just wasn't happening. No disrespect to Christopher, he was one of the most amazing people and so dedicated to his father's legacy. And so what these studios do now could largely determine who gets rights to Silmarillion stories in the future and how these things might get adapted. We see something like War of the Rohirrim get adapted from this tiny little bit of text into this full feature-length film. We see something like Hunt for Gollum be adapted from just these snippets around the text, going to be released as a major motion picture. And so that starts to signal to us what could happen if Silmarillion rights or Unfinished Tales rights start to get released. And perhaps even with Hunt for Gollum, we might even see some negotiation on some rights from Unfinished Tales. And that's going to be big as we look to the future. All right, so now for my highlights from the year, the things that I think are maybe like most important. From the Tolkien fandom perspective, I really think that the Rings of Power Season 2 was the most important thing that happened this year. It was obviously quite controversial. People said a lot of mean things, but from an impact perspective, we're going to see Rings of Power impacting the Tolkien zeitgeist for years to come. There's so much there that is coming out in terms of impacting how we see things visually, the characters, and the way that we're seeing the adaptation of Tolkien's earlier stories, things from the Second Age. And so there's a precedent that's being set that is very important for that. So in terms of impact, I think Rings of Power Season 2 was the most impactful. For me personally, the most important thing from Lord of the Rings perspective for 2024 actually started in 2023, and that was the Magic the Gathering set that was released for the Lord of the Rings. And that really impacted me because I started playing it and I started playing Magic, and it impacted the depth at which I was engaging with the Lord of the Rings, particularly as I started to make shorts videos about the cards that impact how I looked at the Lord of the Rings and how I looked at adaptation. Seeing how the characters from the Lord of the Rings were taken and adapted into the playing card format was really, really interesting. I know it's not the first trading card or playing card game that has been Lord of the Rings, but it was probably the most widely used one because Magic has such a broad fan base. For me, I continued to play it. I played it more in 2024 than I did in 2023. I played with all of the commanders and really experienced the story in a different way through those cards. And I really hope that in the future we will get to see further Tolkien adaptations brought into the world of Magic, because the adaptation was just done so well. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think about what happened in the Tolkien and Middle-earth worlds during 2024? What was most impactful for you? And what do you think will have the biggest impact on the fandom going forward? Until next time, farewell wherever you fare. May your ears receive you at your journey's end.